Day 17. How to remember foreign vocabulary for the long term. 1. Don't learn words in isolation, learn them in context. One of the most common mistakes language learners make is trying to memorize long lists of individual words without understanding how those words are actually used. While this might work for a short-term memory boost, it's rarely effective for long-term retention or real-life communication. That's because your brain doesn't naturally remember isolated data. It remembers meaning, emotion, and connection. Learning words in context helps you build those connections. When you learn a new word inside a full sentence or a real-life situation, you're giving your brain additional information to hold on to: grammar, tone, usage, emotional nuance, and cultural meaning. For example, instead of just memorizing that reluctant means unwilling, it's much more powerful to learn it through a sentence like, "She was reluctant to speak in front of the class." Now you see not only the meaning, but also how and when the word is used. Context also prevents common mistakes. Some words can have multiple meanings or work differently depending on structure. Learning them in isolation might cause confusion or incorrect usage later. But when you learn them as part of a sentence or situation, your brain remembers the natural flow of the language, not just the translation. There are many simple ways to learn vocabulary in context. Use example sentences from textbooks, apps, or native content. Create your own sentences using the new word. Read short stories, dialogues, or news articles in your target language and highlight new words. Watch shows or listen to podcasts and write down how native speakers use certain words. In short, when you learn words through context, you're not just memorizing vocabulary, you're learning how to use the language naturally, which leads to faster recall, deeper understanding, and more confident communication. 2. Use spaced repetition, review in intervals. Spaced repetition is one of the most scientifically proven techniques for long-term memory retention, and it's especially effective when learning foreign vocabulary. The core idea is simple. Instead of cramming a word over and over in a single session, which leads to quick forgetting, you review it at gradually increasing intervals. For example, after 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, then 1 month. This method trains your brain to recall information just before you're about to forget it, which strengthens memory and makes recall faster and more reliable over time. When you first learn a new word, your memory of it is still weak. If you don't review it, you'll likely forget it quickly. But if you review it right before you're about to forget, the brain interprets that word as important and stores it more deeply. The more often this cycle repeats, with longer gaps in between, the stronger your memory becomes, without having to study it over and over again each day. The easiest way to use spaced repetition is through digital flashcard apps like Anki, Quizlet, Brainscape, or Mochi, which automatically schedule your reviews for you based on your performance. If you find a word difficult, it will appear more often. If you remember it easily, the app will show it less frequently. This system is highly personalized and efficient. It saves you from wasting time reviewing words you already know and focuses your attention on the ones you're struggling with. To use this method effectively, start small, with just a few words each day. Review your flashcards daily, even if only for 10 to 15 minutes. Be honest with your answers. Don't cheat yourself by pretending you remembered a word if you didn't. Combine it with context learning by adding example sentences or images to your flashcards. In summary, spaced repetition allows you to memorize vocabulary more effectively, in less time, with better results. It helps move words from short-term memory to long-term memory, so you're not just remembering for the test, you're remembering for life. 3. Connect words with images, sounds, and emotions. One of the most powerful ways to remember vocabulary is to create multisensory associations, that is, linking new words with images, sounds, or personal emotions. This technique works because the brain doesn't just remember language through logic or repetition, it remembers experiences that are visual, emotional, or meaningful. The more senses and feelings you involve while learning, the deeper the memory becomes. For example, imagine you're learning the word icy. You could memorize its definition as very cold, but that's easy to forget. Instead, picture yourself standing on an icy road in winter, shivering, your hands freezing. You might even hear the crunch of snow beneath your feet. That mental scene is much more vivid and emotional than a textbook definition, and because of that, you're far more likely to remember the word. This strategy is especially helpful for abstract words or words with no clear translation. You can link those words to memorable personal experiences, or create funny, exaggerated mental images. For example, To remember the word reluctant, imagine a dog being dragged to take a bath, pulling back with its legs stiff. It's silly, but it sticks. You can also associate vocabulary with sound cues. If a word reminds you of a song lyric, a certain voice, or even a tone of speech, use that sound as a trigger. For example, the French word doucement, meaning gently, can be imagined as being spoken in a soft, slow voice, matching its meaning. Apps like Memrise or Anki, with image/audio support, allow you to add visuals or sounds to your flashcards, but you can do this manually too, by drawing, searching for pictures, or recording your voice saying the word with emotion. This technique is called mnemonic visualization, and has been widely proven to boost memory retention, especially in language learning. The key here is personal connection. When a word makes you feel something, or reminds you of something unique to your life, it becomes more than just a word. It becomes part of your memory network, making it much harder to forget. In short, if you want to remember foreign vocabulary more deeply and naturally, don't just read or repeat the word. See it, feel it, hear it, and live it in your mind. This emotional, sensory approach transforms dull memorization into vivid, lasting learning. 4. Use the create your own sentence and teach it back techniques. Learning a new word is one thing, but being able to use it correctly and confidently is something else entirely. That's why it's essential to go beyond simply recognizing vocabulary and start actively producing it. Two of the most effective ways to do this are by creating your own sentences with new words and explaining or teaching them to someone else. When you create your own sentence using a new word, you're not just memorizing its meaning, you're showing your brain how the word actually functions in real communication. This process forces you to engage with grammar, context, and nuance, which deepens your understanding and builds fluency. For example, if you just learned the word exhausted, don't just write exhausted equals very tired. Instead say, after studying all night, I felt completely exhausted and could barely keep my eyes open. This kind of personal and detailed sentence helps your brain create contextual and emotional links to the word, making it more memorable. The next step is to teach the word back, either to a friend, a study partner, or even just to yourself. Pretend you're a teacher explaining the word to someone who has never heard it before. Define it in your own words, give an example, and explain when and why it's used. This technique draws from the Feynman method, which proves that if you can teach something clearly, you truly understand it. When you try to explain a word aloud, you'll immediately notice if there are any gaps in your understanding, and that gives you a clear direction for review. You don't need a partner to use this method. You can speak to yourself out loud, write your explanations in a journal, or even record short audio clips of yourself defining and using new vocabulary. These small habits encourage active recall and reinforce long-term memory far more effectively than passive reading. In summary, using new words in your own sentences and teaching them out loud helps move vocabulary from your passive memory, where you recognize it, to your active memory, where you can use it fluently. These techniques transform learning from memorization into practical language use, which is the ultimate goal of vocabulary study. 5. Review actively instead of passively. One of the biggest mistakes language learners make is relying too heavily on passive review methods, like rereading vocabulary lists, highlighting words, or simply glancing at notes. While these actions may feel productive, they actually lead to shallow learning and weak memory retention. Your brain needs to work harder to remember in order to remember better. That's where active review comes in. Active review means forcing your brain to recall information without directly looking at the answer. This process, called active recall, has been proven by research to be one of the most effective ways to strengthen long-term memory. Every time your brain works to retrieve a word or meaning, it creates stronger neural connections, making the word easier to remember the next time. Instead of just reading over a list of words, try covering the definitions and asking yourself what they mean. Or look at the meaning and try to recall the word in the target language. You can also practice writing the word from memory, using it in a sentence, or quizzing yourself with flashcards, especially digital ones like Anki or Quizlet that use spaced repetition. Another great technique is brain dumping. At the end of your study session, close your book or app and try to write down as many new words as you can remember, along with their meanings and example sentences. Then check what you missed. This not only tests your memory, but also shows you exactly what needs more review. You can also turn your active review into a game. Challenge yourself. Can you remember all 10 new words you learned yesterday? Without looking. If you're studying with a friend, quiz each other, take turns explaining words, or describe a word without saying it, and let the other person guess. In contrast, passive review may give you a false sense of confidence. Seeing a word might feel familiar, but recognition is not the same as recall. Only when you can produce a word from memory, without help, can you be sure you've truly learned it. To sum up, active review is effortful, but that's exactly why it works. The more your brain works to retrieve a word, the more deeply it's stored. By making active recall a regular part of your study routine, you'll remember vocabulary more accurately, retain it longer, and use it more confidently in real conversations. 6. Maintain regular exposure to vocabulary in real-life contexts. Learning a new word once, even if you understand it well, is not enough. Without repeated exposure in real contexts, your brain will slowly treat that word as unimportant and eventually forget it. That's why it's essential to encounter vocabulary repeatedly, in meaningful ways, outside of your study materials. This kind of natural, consistent exposure is what helps transform new vocabulary into something you can use confidently and automatically. Think of vocabulary like muscles. If you don't use them, they weaken. But when you see, hear, or use a word regularly, your brain gets multiple reminders that this word is useful, and it reinforces that memory every time. This doesn't mean you need to memorize it over and over. Instead, focus on interacting with the word in everyday content: books, podcasts, movies, social media, and conversations. For example, after learning the word curious, you might come across it again in a YouTube video title, hear it in a podcast, or read it in a story. Every time you recognize and understand it in a new context, your brain strengthens the memory of that word. This is how passive exposure turns into active recognition, and eventually, into natural usage. To increase this exposure, surround yourself with the language. Change your phone or app settings to the target language. Follow native speakers or language learning pages on social media. Watch shows or movies with subtitles. Listen to music, audiobooks, or news. Try writing journal entries, short stories, or tweets using new vocabulary. You can even label objects around your room in the target language. The key is consistency. You don't need to study vocabulary for hours every day, but you do need to see and hear it often. The more frequently and naturally a word appears in your environment, the easier it becomes to remember and use it correctly. In short, regular exposure is what transforms a new word from something you learned once into a part of your everyday language system. It moves vocabulary from short-term memory into long-term fluency, not because you forced it, but because you lived with it. Remembering foreign vocabulary isn't just about how many hours you study, it's about how you study. Instead of relying on memorization alone, focus on methods that involve context, repetition, emotion, and usage. Learn new words through meaningful sentences, review them using spaced repetition, and create strong mental connections by linking them with images, sounds, or personal experiences. Most importantly, use the words actively, create your own examples, teach them out loud, and expose yourself to them in real-life content like books, videos, or conversations. The more you interact with vocabulary in a natural, consistent, and engaging way, the more effortlessly it becomes part of your long-term memory. Mastering vocabulary isn't about cramming, it's about making the words a part of your daily thinking and communication. So start applying these strategies today, and you'll find yourself recalling and using words with much more ease and confidence.